Well, as Paul continues on in verse 7 to the next of the character qualities that are marks of maturity, he says that the leader must have a good reputation with outsiders so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. Good reputation is certainly something that should be important to us. It's one of those kind of things that people are really into making a good presentation and putting forth their best look. But reputation refers to something that is more long-term. Reputation is something you build over the years. And one of the things he said that we need to recognize, that if you're going to have a good reputation, it's not going to be because you did something good at one time, but it becomes something that's characteristic of you. And that doesn't mean that you behave perfectly, because sometimes you may say or do things that people say, well, I don't really think that's characteristic of you. And we have to all kind of own that we all fall short of the glory of God. Sometimes we should fall short of even the glory of man, and we do and say things that are not very honorable. But in the whole, we should say that we look at the trajectory of somebody's life and we say, here's where they begin and here's where they end. Every one of us starts at a different point. I know many people who came from really deep, dark, bad places. They got saved, and their journey of transformation has been notable and slow, but at the same time, I don't expect them to have the same maturity as somebody who was hopefully raised in the church and saved as an early age. And I don't want to say that we create this class thing, but one of the things we note about the Apostle Paul when he was building churches, that he would go to the synagogues first, and then he would take the converts from the synagogue, and oftentimes, most often, they became the leaders of the church for one simple reason. They had already been rooted and grounded in the Word of God, and they hadn't become entangled in the moral impurities of the culture that they were living in. So that these guys had a more basic maturity, a sense of homogeneity, and also they tended to come from intact families where there was really, we talked about earlier, being able to manage your own house. They came from households and families that were more wholesome and not torn apart with divorce and things of that nature. Now, I'm not saying that God can't use somebody who comes out of a difficult background, because I came from a difficult background. My parents didn't divorce, thank goodness, but it certainly was anything but a happy home, and marital fidelity didn't exist in my parents' relationship with each other, and that was a whole tragedy and trauma that I had to deal with growing up. But the whole thing that I think is important is that you build your reputation by learning how to make the right choices. And a lot of times the way you learn how to make right choices is by making the wrong choices. That's kind of the learning curve. But over time, when you look at your life, that if you learn from your mistakes, then you find that you can build over a period of time a reputation for being a person of integrity. And integrity is an interesting word, because integer is, in a mathematical sense, is a whole number. In other words, when we talk about people having integrity, we're saying that who they are on the outside is also who they are on the inside. We don't see two people. We don't see people who have a public face and then they have a personal face. And that who they are is the same person throughout. And that's critical, so that we learn how to be, it's not just a matter of saying, well, I am who I am and you just need to accept me as I am. There are people who say that to me, and I'm saying, there's no way in God's green earth I'm going to accept who you are, because I don't really think that you're a wholesome, healthy person, and hanging out with you, it would be kind of toxic. So I'm sorry, no, I don't accept that. But at the same time, when we see somebody who is seeking God, and what they're and the process of seeking God means that God begins to work from the inside out, so that what begins to be expressed on the outside man is what's going on in the inside, so that you can look at somebody, and as the scripture says, we can judge them by their works. Jesus said, judge a tree by its fruits. And so we know an apple tree when we see apples on it. And up until that time, we're all left to question. I had an apple tree that I planted in my yard many years ago, and every year the deer would come in, and as soon as there was an apple, they would eat it. In fact, they'd chew the bark and the leaves, and the thing looked like a bonsai tree after about 5 or 6 years. Finally, I put up a big fence. The deer couldn't get to it, and it began to grow, and what do you know? Apples began to be popped out on there. And when I had COVID, I can't tell you how wonderful it was to go out and pick an apple every morning and bite it fresh off the tree. But that's another story. But the whole point was that, I was never quite sure if I had gotten the right tree until I began to see the fruit begin to produce on it. And that's how we know in people's lives. And so, we get in this place today where we're saying, well, I'm saved, I'm just not a disciple. That doesn't make any sense. That doesn't really float. That's not really something that we can actually say, because if we are saved, like the old song says, if you're saved and you know it, then your life will surely show it. As someone put it recently, I thought it was really well, that when Jesus encountered sinners, they changed, not him. And that's the whole idea. If the difference that Jesus makes doesn't make a difference, then there's a problem, because he's supposed to have that effect. And so it basically says if we want to have a good reputation with outsiders, it's something that should be evident in our life. And so when we're dealing with people, in the marketplace in particular, we make a point of being having as high and honest integrity as we possibly can. We give our word, we keep our word, even when giving our word turns out not to be the most profitable decision we ever made. Again, in Psalms, David said, "Blessed is the man who swears to his own hurt and doesn't change." Believe me, I've made commitments to do things, and afterwards I thought, oh my gosh, why did I commit to do that? But I realized if I've given my word that I'm going to do it, then I have to follow through with it. I can't make that promise and then break it. And then I often pray, I say, Lord, if that wasn't you and I wasn't supposed to do that, you change the situation. And amazingly, I've seen God in his mercy have something come up so that they said, oh, well, we don't need you now, or we can't use it at this point, or it's not going to happen. But the whole point is that there has to be in us this idea that our word is our bond. That when we say we're going to do something, when we shake hands on something, we commit to keeping that bargain and doing our part. And that's pretty rare in this world, where we find people have all sorts of ways of avoiding responsibility and avoiding obligations. And that means sometimes we have to come to people and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I did something wrong. I didn't follow through as I said I would. But it's that idea that other people look at you and say that, I can trust you to do what you say you do. And it's interesting, because just as he said he can't be a new convert because he'll have the same condemnation of the devil, here he says so that he will not fall into disgrace and into the devil's trap. And obviously, if a man is going to fall into disgrace, he's done something very, very significant. And I think this comes back to our marital relationships, our family relationships, that we don't desert our marriages or our families because we have found somebody more fun, or we're just tired of dealing with the difficulties. My mother raised me, and I think it's one of the good things she taught me, that if you commit to do something, you see it through to the end. And that's been pretty largely my view about being married. I mean, I love my wife, and the longer we're together, the more I realize that God knew exactly what he was doing by putting her into my life. And especially because she holds me to accounts on things that, I can be kind of sloppy with. And it's really, really important, I think, to have someone like that in your life that speaks truth in your life. But so many people today, when they have a partner who doesn't let them get away with stuff and holds them accountable and really reminds them about their commitments and is willing to speak into their life and say, you know what, I don't like this when you do this or say this or behave or act this way. And they say, well, I need to find somebody who's more compatible. Believe me, for a man and a woman to get married is the definition of incompatible. Men and women are so vastly different, despite the curt rhetoric, that of course you're different. And it's an irony, because I find that oftentimes we're attracted to people who are different from us because they're different from us. And then when we get married, we get irritated because they're different from us. And it would be a disaster if I married somebody just like me. I needed the kind of personality that my wife has to keep me in check. And so it's so important that we realize that trying to escape doing the right thing is really one of Satan's traps, to get you to be dishonest, to be untruthful, to lie and to fudge and to try to get around things. That's just a very destructive thing. Well, I'm running out of time. I would actually like to hit on that a little more tomorrow, but we'll see if that works out. God bless you and go in his grace.